Ask anyone who the richest black dynasty in Florida is, and you'll get the same two names back, usually Michael Jordan and sometimes Serena Williams. But guess what? Both answers are miles off. Because the actual richest black family in Florida is headed by a man who, long before he became a multi-billionaire, phoned the same company every single Monday for 5 months straight just to get an internship he wasn't eligible for. Now, he's worth more than Jordan, LeBron, and Don Peebles combined. This is the massive business empire of Robert F. Smith, and we're diving right into it. The 3 maps of black money in Florida. Before we get to how Robert made his fortune, you need to understand how black wealth actually sits in this state, because it clusters in 3 very distinct places, and only one of them is quiet. The first is Miami, and that's the one everybody can picture. It's real estate and entertainment money, and the most serious name in it is Don Peebles, who has spent decades building one of the largest black-owned development companies in America, putting up hotels and towers on some of the most contested land in Miami Beach. Miami money is visible by design. If you build a building, people can see the building. The second hub is the Athlete Corridor, running from Broward County up through Jupiter and Hobe Sound. This is where the sports fortunes park themselves, and Michael Jordan is the anchor. He owns a 28,000 square foot house inside the Bears Club in Jupiter, a Jack Nicklaus community, and he built himself a private golf course in Hobe Sound, so demanding that the members nicknamed it Slaughterhouse. Jordan's Florida presence is enormous and extremely well documented, and he's worth somewhere in the region of $3.5 to $4 billion. And then there's the third hub, which is Palm Beach, and this one operates on completely different rules. Palm Beach isn't where you go to be seen, it's where capital goes to sit down. Ken Griffin has spent close to $500 million assembling land there. The names on those deeds are hedge fund founders and private equity chairmen, and most transactions happen privately, off-market, through limited liability companies registered in Delaware, so that the actual buyer never appears in a public database. That's where the richest black family in this state lives. Not in Miami, not in Jupiter. Behind a gate in Seminole Landing, just north of Palm Beach, in a house that once belonged to Tiger Woods' ex-wife. His name is Robert F. Smith, and Forbes puts him at around $10 billion. Sit with that against the others for a second. Jordan is the most famous black businessman in Florida, and Smith is worth roughly 2.5 times what he is. And unless you follow private equity, you have probably never heard his name in your life. So how does a chemical engineer from Denver end up wealthier than Michael Jordan? That part starts with a telephone. The 5-month phone call. Robert Frederick Smith was born in Denver, Colorado in 1962, and the household detail that explains everything is this. Both of his parents held doctorates in education. Both were school principals. This was a home where education wasn't encouraged. It was the family business. And while he was still in high school at Denver's East High, Smith found out that Bell Telephone Laboratories ran an internship program. Bell Labs was, at that point, arguably the most prestigious industrial research institution on Earth, the place that produced the transistor and the laser. The internship was for college students only. A high school kid had no path in at all, so he called them. And when they said no, he called again the following Monday. And the Monday after that, he kept calling every single Monday for 5 months. Then an MIT student who'd been given one of the slots didn't turn up. Somebody in that office remembered the persistent teenager, and Robert Smith got the phone call back. He spent that internship developing a reliability testing algorithm for semiconductors as a high schooler. That story matters far beyond being a nice anecdote, because the entire architecture of his later career is built on exactly that behavior, which is grinding at a closed door on a schedule until somebody opens it. He went to Cornell for chemical engineering, graduated in 1985, and then did what a good chemical engineer does, which is take a good chemical engineering job. Goodyear, Air Products and Chemicals, then Kraft General Foods. And here's the detail I love most about this whole story. While he was at Kraft, Robert Smith registered 2 U.S. patents and 2 European patents relating to coffee brewing technology. So somewhere in the mechanics of how coffee gets made at scale, there is intellectual property filed by a man who is now worth $10 billion. But he'd worked out something about his own trajectory, which is that the serious money in the coming decades wasn't going to be in making things. It was going to be in owning the companies that made things. So he went to Columbia Business School, took an MBA in 1994, and walked into Goldman Sachs. By 1997, he'd moved to Silicon Valley to build Goldman's technology mergers and acquisitions practice essentially from nothing. And between 1994 and 2000, he advised on tens of billions of dollars in deals involving Apple, Microsoft, Texas Instruments, eBay, and Yahoo. Speaking of being the man tech giants called before their biggest deals, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called The Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time. And the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to Robert Smith and the leap that changed everything. Then in 2000, he quit Wall Street entirely and built the thing that actually made him rich: the software empire. Nobody talks about Vista Equity. Partners now manages more than $107 billion, and to understand why it worked, you have to understand what everybody else in private equity was doing at the time. The standard playbook was financial. Buy a company using a lot of borrowed money, cut costs hard, strip out whatever isn't essential, get the numbers looking healthy, and sell it on. It's a spreadsheet exercise. You're not really improving the business, you're restructuring it. Smith did something genuinely different, and it came directly out of being an engineer. He decided to treat software companies the way you'd treat a factory floor. He built a set of standardized operating procedures, hundreds of documented best practices covering how you price a product, how you run a sales team, how you handle customer renewals, and Vista applied that same playbook to every single company it bought. Not restructuring, manufacturing discipline, imported into an industry that had never had any. And he was extremely specific about what he bought, which is the second half of the insight. Vista went after enterprise software with recurring subscription revenue, meaning the deeply unglamorous systems that hospitals and banks and insurance companies literally cannot switch off. Nobody wakes up and cancels the software their payroll runs on. That revenue is closer to a utility bill than a product sale. Buy the thing nobody can cancel, then run it with factory discipline. That was the whole formula. And Vista's returns ran near 30% annually across 2 decades, which in private equity is a genuinely extraordinary number. And it's worth understanding what that discipline actually looked like inside one of these companies, because it wasn't gentle. When Vista acquired a software business, the founders and executives would typically be handed the playbook and expected to run it. How your salespeople are compensated, how leads get qualified, how renewals are chased, how pricing tiers are structured. All of it standardized against what Vista had already proven worked across dozens of other companies. Some founders found it liberating, because somebody had finally answered questions they'd been guessing at for years. Others found it suffocating and left. But the logic underneath is hard to argue with. Most software companies are built by engineers who are brilliant at building software and have never been taught how to sell it. Vista's entire thesis was that the product was usually fine and the operation around it was the broken part. At various points, Vista's combined software portfolio has been described as the 4th largest enterprise software organization on the planet, behind only Microsoft, Oracle, and SAP. A firm one man started in 2000 sitting in the same tier as Oracle. That's the machine. Now let's look at where the money actually lands, because the Florida footprint is more interesting than the headline number suggests. The Florida footprint. The family home is in Seminole Landing, an oceanfront enclave near North Palm Beach, and it's a British West Indies-style estate of over 23,000 square feet, sitting on more than an acre of gated grounds with direct ocean frontage. It has a good story attached, too, because the house was originally built by Elin Nordegren, Tiger Woods' ex-wife, and Smith bought it in 2020 from Russ Weiner, the founder of Rockstar Energy Drinks, for $48.2 million. Now, I want to correct something you'll see repeated about this family, because there are figures floating around claiming that compound cost $80 million. The recorded purchase price was $48.2 million. It's a spectacular house. It just isn't the number people quote. And then there's the second property, which is genuinely instructive about how families at this level operate. In December of 2022, a Delaware-registered company called Hope Enterprises, RELLC, named for Smith's wife, bought a house at 150 El Vedado Road in Palm Beach for $23 million. 7 bedrooms, 6,500 square feet, a lap pool, built in 1986, sitting about a mile and a half north of Mar-a-Lago. The family office confirmed at the time that this was an investment property, not a home. Here's the part that tells you how hot that market had become. The sellers had bought that same house in January of 2021 for $7.88 million. They sold it to Smith's company for $23 million less than 2 years later. That is a jump of roughly 190% on the same building. Smith's team then gutted it, completely reimagined it in the words of the listing, and put it back on the market at $35 million. And it didn't get 35. It sold on the 29th of May, 2026 for $29.25 million. Now, you will see that framed online as a $6 million profit, and I want to be straight with you, because that framing quietly ignores the renovation bill. They bought at 23, spent a serious and undisclosed amount rebuilding the house, asked 35 and took 29.25. Depending on what that renovation actually cost, this deal is somewhere between a modest win and roughly breaking even, which is genuinely more interesting than pretending it was a masterstroke, because it tells you something true. Even at $10 billion, in the hottest luxury market in America, the flip doesn't automatically work. The Palm Beach market had already run so hard that the previous owners captured most of the upside before Smith's company ever got there. The rest of the portfolio spans a mansion in Austin, a $59 million triplex penthouse in Chelsea and Manhattan, and property in Malibu and Denver. So that's the money and the property. The family living inside it is a stranger combination than you'd expect. The family. Smith was married for over 20 years to Suzanne McFadden, who he met while they were both students at Cornell in the 80s. They married in 1988, separated in 2011, divorced in 2014, and have 3 children together. Then in 2015, he married Hope Dworacek, and the pairing is a genuinely unusual one at this altitude of finance. Hope was Playboy's Playmate of the Year in 2010, appeared on Celebrity Apprentice, and has since built her own skincare company called Muta. They married at the Via d'Este on Lake Como in Italy, and John Legend and Seal both performed. They have 4 children together, and the names tell you something about the household. 2 sons called Hendrix and Legend, after Jimi Hendrix and John Legend, and twin daughters called Zuri and Zaya. With the 3 from his first marriage, that's 7 children across the family. So the picture is a chemical engineer turned private equity chairman, famously disciplined and process-driven, married to a former playmate, raising 7 kids across a set of estates, with a wedding that had 2 Grammy winners on the bill. It's not the image the private equity industry usually projects, and I suspect that's rather the point. But the reason most people who do know Smith's name know it at all has nothing to do with any of this. It's because of one morning in Atlanta. The $34 million sentence. In May of 2019, Robert Smith gave the commencement address at Morehouse College, the historically black men's college in Atlanta. Partway through, he announced that his family would eliminate the entire student loan debt of the graduating class. Every graduate. Roughly $34 million. And crucially, it covered the loans that parents and guardians had taken on to put those young men through school, which meant it wasn't just clearing a graduate's balance, it was releasing an entire family from a debt. The footage of that moment went around the world, and it's still the thing he's most recognized for. What's less known is that he built an institution out of it rather than leaving it as a gesture. The Student Freedom Initiative now offers income-contingent funding as an alternative to conventional student loans for STEM students across historically black colleges and universities, which attacks the underlying problem rather than one graduating class. And the giving elsewhere is substantial. $50 million to Cornell's College of Engineering, which resulted in the department being renamed the Robert Frederick Smith School of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering, with another $15 million following for technology fellowships. $20 million to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture before it had even opened. funding a center that uses digital archiving and genetic genealogy to help African American families trace ancestry that slavery deliberately erased. In 2016, he became chairman of the board of Carnegie Hall, the first Black person ever to hold that position. And he was the first Black American to sign the Giving Pledge. That's a genuinely serious philanthropic record by any standard, which makes the next part of this story considerably harder to sit with. The $139 million problem. When Smith founded Vista in 2000, the seed money didn't come from a bank. It came from a Houston software billionaire named Robert Brockman, who put up around $1 billion to get the fund off the ground. That single relationship became, 2 decades later, the biggest problem of Smith's life. Federal prosecutors and the IRS spent 4 years investigating a structure of offshore trusts and accounts spread across Belize, Bermuda, and Switzerland. What they concluded was that between 2000 and 2015, Smith had failed to report roughly $200 million in income and capital gains flowing through those entities. In October of 2020, he entered a non-prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice, which meant admitting the conduct in exchange for not being criminally charged. He paid roughly $139 million in back taxes, interest and penalties, including a $56 million civil fraud penalty. He surrendered $145 million in charitable deductions he had claimed. And he agreed to cooperate as a witness against Brockman, who was separately charged with evading tax on $2 billion, in what prosecutors called the largest individual tax fraud case in American history. Brockman died in 2022 before that case reached trial. And here's the part that says something uncomfortable about how this world actually works. Vista's institutional investors largely stayed. Pension funds and endowments kept their capital in place because the returns had been strong enough for long enough that the arithmetic outweighed the headline. So the honest portrait of this family is both things at once. One of the most significant philanthropists in modern American finance, and one of the largest individual tax settlements the country has ever recorded, in the same lifetime, roughly a year apart. Why they're actually number one. So bring it back to those 3 maps of Florida money. In Miami, Don Peebles built a genuinely major development company by putting up buildings you can stand in front of. Up the coast in Jupiter, Michael Jordan built the most recognizable athlete fortune in America, worth somewhere near $4 billion, with a private golf course to match. Both of those are real, and both took decades. And behind a gate in Seminole Landing sits a man worth around $10 billion, more than both of them together, who has no team, no shoe line, no show, and no reason for you to ever have heard of him. That's the actual lesson of this whole story. The most visible wealth in a state is almost never the largest. Jordan's money comes from being seen, so being seen is the business. Smith's money comes from owning the unglamorous software that hospitals and banks cannot function without, and that business rewards being invisible. A kid in Denver called Bell Labs every Monday for 5 months. He patented something to do with coffee. He learned the discipline of a factory and pointed it at an industry that had never encountered it. And he ended up with a bigger fortune than the most famous athlete on earth, living quietly in a house down the road from him. So what got you the most? The 5 months of Monday phone calls, the coffee patents, or the $34 million he gave away in the middle of a graduation speech? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to Black Status because we break down empires like this every single week.